Hello, everyone. We'll take about a minute. Just get everyone settled and entered.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
It's Took weather here.
Yep. And tea, Took and tea. Or tea and Took. I don't know what works better. Okay, so people sort of wander in as we get started, but I will, in order to be efficient with time, I'll go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Joanna Veronkovich. We are here for the Workshop in Cultural Affairs series. And for our third workshop, I believe we're here this semester. So I'm excited to have two speakers for our series today. We have Professors Dave O'Brien from, well, actually from both across the ocean. And we have Professor Kathryn Brown, and both Professor Brown or Dave and Professor O'Brien or Dave, or Professor Brown and Kathryn are contributors to the volume that we let out earlier this year on Innovating Institutions and Inequities in the Arts. So both of them will be talking about the chapters they contributed in an effort to have a discussion about this empirically driven work on a very important topic. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over. I believe, Kathryn, you're going to have the screen first, and then we'll move to Dave. But I think what we'll do this time is we'll have both Dave's and Kathryn's talk, one after the other, and then we'll reserve our conversation for after both of the talks are complete. So with that, Kathryn, please feel free to do a little bit more of an introduction than I did. I try to keep them short, but if you'd like to introduce yourself and your co-authors, please feel free. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna. It's wonderful to be here, and it's great to see such a fantastic audience and to be part of this wonderful seminar. So as Joanna said, I'm going to introduce the chapter that my co-authors and I contributed to Innovating Institutions and Inequities in the Art World, the wonderful volume that Joanna and Doug edited. So I'm presenting today on behalf of myself and my co-authors, Alain Cumin, Yoram Eshkol-Rocache, Gloria Guirao-Soro, Ocean Sai, and Franziska Wilmsen. So my topic, the topic that we were interested in this chapter, it's titled Activists versus Gatekeepers, and I'll explain why we've chosen that title in a moment. What we were interested in investigating in this chapter, and Joanna is absolutely right that this was an empirically driven investigation, we're interested in looking at the gallery representation, reputational markers, and uneven structures of opportunities for artists in the contemporary US art world. So what we did was to look at three interconnected areas. We were interested in how artists are represented by commercial galleries, who's getting commercial gallerist representation, how that relates to the award of major art prizes in the US, and what artists are getting chosen to participate in the Venice Biennale and to represent the US. So we're interested in how these three different areas interconnect and how they impact on the creation of opportunities for artists. Now, we're aware of the fact that the realms that we're talking about here in this cultural sector have slightly different values. We're looking at, on the one hand, commercial representation, so part of the art market, and with something like the Venice Biennale, a kind of space that overlaps with almost like a museum space, a curated space. So these areas of the art world have their own distinctive logics, but what we're interested in is seeing how they overlap in terms of markers of prestige and how those markers of prestige affect individuals' professional advancement. We're really asking the question, as an artist, is it possible to miss the boat? Can I just get left out? And if I am left out, who's doing the gatekeeping? Who's controlling process of selection and filtering that end up creating opportunities for success or indeed failure? Now, here's where I come to the title of the piece, Activists versus Gatekeepers. And I just want to mention the kind of activist that we're talking about here. And we're really thinking about, on the one hand, curatorial activism, a way of curating that is designed to shake up the art world, to create exhibitions that break the rules, that challenge, for example, socially exclusionary practices of selection or exhibition, the kind of curating that comes along and makes us question the canon, for example. And that's become a familiar part of our museum life, really. And it's great. It can produce some really interesting results. But if I'm an artist, does it occur too late in the process to be of use to me? Lucy Lippard, when she wrote the introduction to Maura Riley's book about curatorial activism, she said, it's important for individuals to be included in the pool of respected artists when shows are being selected. So when I just want to be a candidate, I want to be there to be potentially chosen to participate in an exhibition. So on the one hand, we've got curatorial activism coming in up here, challenging museum canons and so on. On the other hand, however, as an artist, I just want to be one of the people who has the opportunity to actually be included in that exhibition. So the curatorial activism might be actually coming along too late for me as an individual to benefit from it. If it is coming along too late, why? Who are the gatekeepers who are controlling access to these benefits, these opportunities, the possibility of being included in that pool of respected artists? Well, the very famous sociologist of art markets, Raymond Moulin, wrote way back in the 1990s that artistic recognition occurs through a combination of commercial and institutional success. And I think it's interesting that she puts commercial success in that formulation. And that's a sort of problematic point, really, because the market, of course, is beholden to its own logic. I'm going to sell what I think is going to sell. That's very different from what a museum might choose to put in its institution that has a different set of beneficiaries or a different kind of public mission. So that means that commercial gallerists actually operate as very important gatekeepers to artists' career success, to their commercial opportunities, to their public recognition. So it's how do these gallerists and activists, these gatekeepers and activists, actually work together or against each other to impact on artists. So we were interested in this chapter on examining the effect of gatekeeping on art world diversity. And we also wanted to, in thinking about gatekeeping, extend an idea that was put forward by Olufemi Otaiwo about elite capture. That is the appropriation of strategies and discourses that relate to identity politics, but appropriating them in ways that actually suit those in powerful positions rather than those who they're supposed to help in marginal positions. So in other words, how are some gatekeepers coming along and actually appropriating strategies around identity politics to suit themselves, essentially? So our approach was to look at, first of all, gather some empirical data around one of the most important art fairs in the US, Art Basel Miami Beach. And we looked at the artist rosters of US galleries, including galleries of US origin or of foreign origin that have a branch in the US and that exhibited in the main sector of Art Basel Miami Beach in 2021. So the main sector is the most prestigious part of the fair. We ended up looking at the rosters, about 106 rosters, and so nearly 4,000 artists. And going through them, we noticed a significant preference for works by male artists, and in particular, white male artists, of the rosters we looked at. And these are the rosters of the gallery, of the gallery as a whole, so not just people who were exhibited. Nearly 3,000 artists were white, so 75%. Only 25% from ethnic minority backgrounds. Nearly 70% of the artists were men, around 30% women and 13% non-binary or transgender. So clearly a significant bias towards white male artists. We wondered whether the gallery ownership, how this played out in terms of gallery ownership, and whether or not that also impacted on what artists were being shown. Again, in terms of gallery ownership, there was a predominantly, the galleries were predominantly owned by men, 58 out of 62 owned by white men, substantially fewer by women or by mixed gender duos or collectives. And we couldn't see that there was any correlation between who was running the gallery and what they were actually showing. So just because a gallery was operated by a woman, it didn't seem to correlate to a showing of more women, for example. We also noticed that although some galleries were very upbeat about their sort of diversity agenda and the diversity of their own rosters, that they were also showing artists who were dead. So, for example, some galleries were very positive about the number of women that they were showing, but it turned out, for example, that some of those women might have been people like Mary Cassatt or Berthe Morisot or other artists who had actually died quite a while ago, but whose names were still being used to showcase how diverse the roster of the gallery was. So they, for a contemporary art fair, they weren't necessarily sort of showing their credentials in promoting diversity in the contemporary artists that they represented. So we then thought, well, let's have a look at prizes and think about, whether similar issues were playing out there. We turned, first of all, to a very prestigious prize, the American Academy of Arts and Letters Gold Medal, and we looked at the award of that prize from 2000 to 2022. Of the 12 artists who had been awarded the prize, only 4 women out of those artists and only 2 Black artists. Now, we also noted that this was a sort of lifetime achievement award. So we wondered whether or not, because the artists were older, whether or not, the historical issues around opportunity or lack thereof had played out in the careers of the artists who had been awarded those medals. A slightly different picture sort of came to the fore when we looked at the Carnegie Prize. So that's a $10,000, I think, prize. Again, we've got a slightly broader demographic in terms of age group, so it's not a lifetime achievement award. And a little bit more, certainly a bit more gender diversity in the award of that prize, with in 2018, Lynette Yaram-Boakye being the first Black female laureate to win that prize. And then a lot more diversity found in the Fine Prize, which is a prize for emerging artists, where in fact all of the awards since inception were made to artists from ethnic minority backgrounds. We then just wanted to have a quick look at the composition of the juries of those prizes. And again, we found, although the balance has shifted and the juries have become more diverse in terms of gender over the past years, there is still a demonstrable lack of diversity around the ethnic makeup of the prize, the juries of those prizes. So some slight change over recent years, but not significant. Where we did see some change was around the selection of artists for the Venice Biennale. So here we looked at who was being invited to represent the US from 2001 to 2022, and we looked at both artists and curators. There we found that of the 12 artists representing the US, 8 men and 4 women over that period, with a little bit more balance in terms of ethnic diversity. There had been an increase in the number of female curators chosen to do the curating of the pavilion. 13 out of 18 curators were women, but less ethnic diversity. 15 out of 18 of those curators were white. So where does that get us? First of all, we were we needed to acknowledge in our data gathering that what we were doing was subject to certain limitations. We were relying on publicly available information about gender and ethnicity of the individuals involved, and of course that has its limitations. But even allowing for a substantial margin of error, our overall results and conclusions were still quite stark. We also noted that our data didn't consider the impact of an artist's starting point. So in terms of their personal education, their financial opportunities, and what their individual personal experiences and life trajectories, how that had impacted on their opportunities. But what we came back to on the basis of our discussion was that, coming back to that idea of, who makes it into the pool of respected artists on whom curators draw, that certainly prizes and commercial gallery representation play an important factor on whether or not you make it into that pool of artists. And while we'd seen some change, I think, in diversity in the worlds of both prize giving and Venice Biennale representation, the art market tells a very different story. And there we do see power remaining very much in the hands of commercial gatekeepers, where we see really a quite significant lack of diversity, both in terms of gender and ethnicity. And I think importantly, and in terms of the elite capture that Taiwo was talking about, gaps between the rhetoric and the practice of diversity. So gallerists, and indeed some museums, often laying claim to diversity, but not practicing it in reality, or certainly not being transparent about how they're practicing it. So where we got to, and I'm just about on time, so I'm going to stop in a second. Where we got to was that what we'd love to see would be a much more fundamental restructuring of the art world to create opportunities for a wider range of artists. And what would that look like? Well, we were focusing on the existence of filtering processes that are employed by gatekeepers, who themselves are often drawn from a very narrow demographic, and who are capable of bestowing privilege in different areas of the art world. So taking up Taiwo's point, how do we achieve a more constructive politics? How do we bring about a greater distribution of opportunities? That would indeed be the next chapter that we would write, but taking up an idea put forward by Joseph Fishkin in his book on gatekeeping. We think that the art world would benefit from increased opportunity pluralism. What would that mean? Well, it might mean things like greater access to art school and arts administration education. I mean, actually increasing the number of the diversity at the level of control, at the level of curation. Certainly, and I think this is an absolutely crucial point, financial support for artists in the years after they complete their first degree or their MFA. So, being an artist is a very precarious career. And if I don't think I'm going to be able to actually survive, then it's a real disincentive to my undertaking that career. So if we had a basic income scheme, for example, for artists in those early years after completion of an MFA, maybe that would increase the number of on-ramps onto an art career. Added to that, career mentorship, routes to professional success that don't rely on gallery representation. And how do we break that stranglehold of the commercial gallerists over that structure of opportunities that lead to my being included or not included in the pool of respected artists that Lucy Lippard mentioned? And I'm going to stop it there because I'm right on time, and I'll hand over to Dave.
Thank you, Kathryn. Dave, it's up to you to continue.
Thanks. I was just putting a little message in just to follow up from what Kathryn was saying. Myself and some colleagues are publishing some work on who goes to art schools in the UK in a couple of weeks' time, and these statistics are pretty brutal in terms of the pipeline, particularly at the places, to be frank, that matter to the art system. Anyway, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about that, but from a sort of slightly different perspective. And it's worth saying my kind of case study here is going to be from the publishing industry, but much of the inequalities of entry that Kathryn has identified are going to be quite obviously present in this discussion. So I'm talking about the chapter in the book, and it was a sort of great project to be part of, actually, from the initial inception at the hybrid workshop 2-3 years ago. Now it's a while ago, isn't it? And then through to seeing the chapter in print a couple of months ago. So this is work with Mark Taylor and Siobhan McAndrew, who are from the University of Sheffield, and then Orion Brooke from the University of Edinburgh. And really the chapter is kind of part of a broader trajectory, really, of work that a cluster of us here in the UK are sort of involved in and part of. And this is not to be sort of overly self-critical, but the way this work has evolved is we've been very interested in social class, social mobility, in intersectional terms, to explain inequalities that we find in a variety of different cultural and creative occupations. But what we usually do, and here's a couple of examples of publications in this space, is we usually tend to kind of frame things in terms of why are those from working class, routine and manual, I guess kind of the US, you'd probably use the term middle class, or, you know, kind of blue collar, social origins, dropping out with the creative workforce. And, you know, we've done a lot of policy work where we've tried to kind of sketch out, here are the barriers, here are the leaks in the pipeline, to use that slightly unfortunate metaphor. This, I suppose, kind of perspective has, you know, been really important and really influential in a variety of ways, which is good. But often it means the lens is both the kind of analytic and the policy lens is focused really on, you know, those from kind of marginalized backgrounds not getting in. And we've done less, really, I suppose, on those from more kind of prestigious backgrounds, having a slightly kind of easier path into culture and creative jobs, and then sort of reflecting on how they end up staying in. To give a bit of sort of theoretical frame around this, I'm drawing on broader discussions and debates about social mobility, some of which actually has been inspired by authors in the States, Jesse Streeb, Rich Osajo, who've written a lot about downward mobility in particular. As I mentioned, a lot of the kind of the work on social mobility really is interested in this upward mobility question. So, to what extent are the children of, you know, cleaners or factory workers ending up as lawyers, doctors, you know, that kind of thing? This question of to what extent is there upward mobility in society? How prevalent is this upward mobility, and what are the kind of odds or chances of particular individuals experiencing that upward mobility? Downward mobility, the idea that someone who's the child of a lawyer, a doctor, a CEO might end up working as a cleaner or working in a factory or as a bus driver, has seen a lot less attention, both actually kind of quantitative and qualitative. And one of the things we do in the chapter is kind of sketch out, not frustration, but a slight, I guess, kind of puzzle, really, about why there is this kind of imbalance in the literature and where the literature has kind of focused. It's worth saying we use this in a kind of sociological sense. A lot of the kind of current action in the study of mobility is driven by economists who are interested in income mobility rather than professional or occupational social mobility. And this term has kind of gone out into the public and policy wild in the UK. And actually, I'm part of a project at the moment that is asking people, what do you think social mobility is, as part of thinking about inequalities more generally? And we're getting some fascinating answers to that. So if the literature has kind of tended to underplay its interest in downward mobility, why does this matter for kind of cultural and creative jobs? We think it matters for a variety of reasons, for kind of consequential reasons, but also for more kind of I suppose sort of empirical reasons as well. In terms of the empirical reasons, we're very interested in the way that in occupational classifications, we tend to think of cultural and creative jobs. So being an artist, being a writer, being an actor, being a film director, as quite high up the classification scales. So they're not as high up as, say, being a CEO or a lawyer or a doctor, but they're kind of the next rung down in most international occupational classification. So, we think of these as kind of middle class jobs. And so it means that in the social mobility framework, people are often upwardly mobile if they've started from working class occupations into cultural and creative jobs, even though these jobs might be insecure, low paid, precarious, all of the issues that we're sort of very well familiar with in terms of cultural and creative occupations. Now, this quantitative stuff I'm going to touch on isn't in the chapter. It's coming out as part of a book we're writing for Princeton University Press on downward mobility and the cultural and creative sector. But one of the things we've noticed when we've been doing some work on this is that these cultural and creative jobs have some of the highest proportions of people who are from the kind of upper echelons of social professional occupational scale in terms of their starting point. What we're finding is when we do kind of quantitative analysis is that there are large proportions of people who are the children of doctors, lawyers, CEOs ending up in our artists, journalists, writers, directors, actors categories, much higher actually than we'd expect given their place in the occupational hierarchy. I won't dwell too much on this stuff, but when we do the kind of rankings of highest proportions of those from the most elite occupations are kind of, artists, officers, producers, directors, into journalists, archivists, musicians, etc., quite high up the scale, higher up than we'd expect, given where they're situated. We also find that they're high up in terms of status scales as well. So again, I won't go into this, and it's not in the chapter, but just to give a little flag of what we're working on kind of next. We're finding that there are real kind of status gains, even though there might be class position losses and obviously kind of income and things like, precariousness losses as well. This balance, I guess, of the kind of loss of class position and the kind of offset of status gains is one thing that we think is a clue to why there is so much inequality. And we think this kind of supplements the classic economist's answer of there are just far too many people that drive down wages and, the kind of oversupply in labour markets, although I guess kind of status is in some of the economists' calculations as well. We think the impact of those who have got lots of resources, lots of economic, social and cultural capital is one thing that ends up kind of excluding those who might be talented but lack those resources. And this maps on quite closely to class position. And one of the things we're sort of interested in, and this is where the work in the chapter comes in to its own really, is understanding how this, one, plays out in practice, and two, how the kind of experiences of workers might give us clues as to how we might kind of solve some of these structural problems associated with the dominance of the downwardly mobile into artistic and cultural jobs. So I'm just going to give you two case studies really from two different data sets. One was from this panic data set, which is what we based Culture is Bad for You on. The other is from this project on social mobility into a variety of creative occupations. These are the two publications I showed you at the start of the talk. And the kind of, I think they're good ideal types. They reflect basically what we found in almost 300 interviews with creative workers from a variety of different demographic backgrounds. The story of upward mobility on the one hand, Laura, a woman of colour in her 40s, who was very senior in publishing from a working class origin, is contrasted with John, who is in a similar senior publishing role, but much younger, almost 20 years younger than Laura, from a middle class origin, and thus kind of downwardly mobile into his publishing job. The different experiences, I think, tell us quite a lot about how inequality functions. For example, the importance of cultural capital, which, you know, everybody would be familiar with, Annette Lboro, Seamus Khan's work, that's really kind of driven this stuff. You know, John telling us he had a rich cultural life, you know, the kind of classical music, galleries, theatre, classical music of his house, but at the same time, his own sense of kind of agency, not being particularly interested in that kind of culture, engaged in popular culture, popular music, you know, wasn't interested in going to galleries, you know, museums, etc. But, you know, a kind of a rich cultural life, both in terms of his own interests and I guess in terms of the familial interests he was somewhat rebelling against. We can contrast this with Laura, a much, I suppose, kind of more restricted access to culture, dominated by television, culture around the house, you know, sitting around our one television, but enabled by access to the public library. So rather than the kind of private consumption of, you know, going to gigs or whatever, the kind of, you know, public infrastructure that was really, really kind of crucial to her, and that kind of sense of, you know, looking for escapism in books, loving books, and indeed, you know, something that would go on to play an important role later in her life as a publisher. Growing up, very different educational routes. John talking about how he was never particularly encouraged to do a vocational thing or a scientific, you know, mathematical thing. Actually, you know, a kind of creative role was totally fine. You know, he was encouraged to think beyond just getting a job, just earning money. You know, a sort of an encouragement to be interested in arts, humanities, the creative and cultural side of things. Laura, by contrast, no experience of higher education in the family, no real kind of role models, no aspirations. She was very kind of academically strong, but, you know, to an extent, she ended up doing what she was doing, which was studying theatre in university, almost kind of by default, a much kind of luckier, I suppose, route into education. Entering the labour market, very different kind of experiences of what is seemingly the same structural issue in the labour market. So we know that working for free is endemic in cultural and creative labour markets. Things like internships are, you know, a sort of standard route into many cultural and creative jobs. But for John, from a kind of more affluent, better resourced background, talking about, you know, doing free labour in publishing, but having a sense of I guess, kind of agency. You know, it wasn't an exploitative free internship. It was much more something that he, you know, sort of was able to choose and had, I guess, kind of control over his career. Laura went for an internship in television production. Initially, she wanted to be involved in kind of media industries, and hit a brick wall because she couldn't afford to work for free for a full year. And, you know, the sort of experience, both of them being like, well, you know, you do kind of have to work for free. Laura meeting a dead end, John experiencing agency and a kind of an enabling role to his experience of unpaid work. John told us he was really lucky. He talked to us about how, you know, he'd kind of risen through the ranks. He was good at relationships. You know, relationships, as he says, were what allowed him to kind of outcompete, you know, and kind of get ahead in the publishing industry. You know, and he was in his 20s, and as I say, you know, was kind of relatively senior and had, you know, somewhat of a kind of stellar rise through the ranks. Contrast with Laura, who, you know, similarly, you know, we talked about, you know, kind of getting lucky, hitting it off with people, but then realizing that, you know, whereas John is telling us about, you know, speaking to people, learning, building, you know, maintaining relationships, Laura is telling us basically about having to sort of shut down her sense of self in the workplace. And even where she met people who from working class backgrounds like herself, You know, everybody had conformed to what was expected of you in terms of talking, behavior, speaking, a sense of kind of, if we were being benign, we might talk about socialization, but really a sense of kind of assimilation into particular workplace cultures. And, you know, I used to lie about where I used to live as a kind of stark crystallization of that alienation. John, you know, being reflexive, talking about downward mobility as being fine. You know, he has a sense of confidence, a sense of ease. He didn't perceive obstacles. Money isn't really an issue. He's not from a massively rich family or anything. They always say they're not from massively rich families, like always, you know, none of them are like we're stinking rich. But, you know, he was from an extremely affluent strata of British society. And the sense, you know, if I got made unemployed, I could just go and live with my parents, borrow money off them, or whatever. And it's interesting and striking, you know, he drew a distinction between, you know, not being kind of Oxbridge, not getting the father-in-law who gave you a job in the city, but, you know, sort of knowing that confidence and social ease was important to him. And as he described, his kind of sense of agency and career development, it was interesting in two ways, really. One was his sense of kind of self within the story of his career, but also, I guess, the kind of maybe aesthetic motivation. You know, he was sort of dissatisfied with, you know, a kind of commercial basis for his role. You know, his labor was just padding the pockets of the rich owner, and you know, he was able to move to something that basically kind of gave him much more, I guess, kind of creative control, and gave, you know, a kind of sense of pride in his career that draws really from the kind of aesthetic status rather than the financial benefits that he's getting working in a senior publishing role. Laura was a kind of a contrast, and I don't want to sort of over-egg this particular sort of working class solidarity pudding, but thinking about what Kathryn was talking about in terms of the translation from individuals making decisions and their demographics into what happens in terms of who is represented in the art world. Laura's experience of a career was less to do with her own sense of aesthetic control, but was much more to do with the push, really, to make sure people either under her or coming after her didn't have the same experiences as her. So things like, you know, maternity benefits, which are, you know, kind of controversial in publishing. Publishing is dominated by younger aged, comparatively, women, but it has real kind of issues and to an extent kind of career penalties when women have children, considering it should be a much more kind of child-friendly industry given its demographics. Laura was kind of explicit, you know, the consequence of her personal experiences to make things fair, to make things about equality, you know, allowing people to kind of bring themselves to work. And this is not, you know, to kind of be, I suppose, negative or making a moral judgment at Tom, but just to kind of frame the sense of what those resources had allowed in terms of, as he describes, you know, kind of a smooth career with a lot of agency and I suppose a lot of kind of sense of the meaning of his career for himself, whereas Laura's career was narrated much more as something that was about trying to change an industry that had been initially kind of hostile and unwelcoming to her. So just to wrap up, giving us 20 minutes for questions, discussion, this matters because I think a lot of policy and guidance in this space is about how do we get more people in rather than how do we change the system, particularly in terms of the kind of structural and social issues. I mean, I could repeat what Kathryn has said about how we change the art world. It's the same about how we change the film world, the publishing world, the theatre world, etc. And I think kind of flipping this both contributes to these kind of public and policy debates, but also it gives us some quite interesting insights for the academic scholarship, both in terms of thinking about how inequalities operate in cultural and creative industries, but also actually tying into much kind of broader debates about social inequalities and how, I suppose, kind of elites reproduce themselves, which are obviously kind of hot topics far beyond just cultural policy and creative industries. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Kathryn. So before we go into questions from our audience, and please do feel free to put your questions in the chat. Trevor and Carol, I see yours, so I'll get to those in a moment, or raise your hand. I want to ask one question to try to bring both of these presentations together a little bit. I'm particularly interested in the sort of the sociological matches between the gatekeeper and the people who are either entering or not able to enter the gate, and what we know about those. So what makes it more or less likely for the gatekeeper to bring someone in versus what makes it less likely? And the reason I ask this is because I think there's a little bit of a sociological literature that talks about, for example, an example is, women and how women in power sometimes are a little bit harder on women who are trying to climb the ladders, right? And whether or not there is more of that type of literature that looks at whether or not the matching of who's doing the opening of the gates actually makes a difference.
Well, I guess we're both going to have a view on that. I think it's it's a great point. But as I say, in what we were looking at, we didn't see diversity matching or being furthered necessarily by the person who was doing the gatekeeping. Women weren't hiring more women, representing more women artists. I think it's particularly, I think it might be in part, and this comes to Trevor's question as well, slightly industry specific. I think it makes a difference whether or not we're talking about gatekeeping in a publishing industry or a performance industry where you can repeat the object, or whether you're talking about the visual arts, which is what I'm looking at and my co-authors are looking at, where you've just got the one thing that goes out there into the world. And we can come back to that in a minute. So I think the gatekeeping role therefore fulfills a different purpose and is structured slightly differently according to which cultural industry we're talking about. And I also, in the museum world, think it performs very differently whether or not you're talking about gatekeeping at that museum level or gatekeeping in the market, because they really do have such essentially different logics. Now, my problem is those logics are starting to conflate. When the market starts to influence museum culture to the extent that it is, when art itself becomes part of a kind of speculative logic that gets taken up by museums, then I think we're getting into real difficulties, because we've got the tail wagging the dog there. So I'll stop there and I'll come back to the other point in a second. But Dave, do you want to?
I was going to agree with everything you said, apart from I'm much more relaxed about the tail wagging the dog, given how moribund some museums are, and a bit of market discipline can be good. But we are recording this, so I probably shouldn't say such controversial things. Yeah, I mean, completely agree in terms of the specific dynamics of the cultural industry in question. I'd also say it's worth saying I'm on a project about television production at the moment, and the data is incredible, because everybody gets that, we desperately need a more kind of open and diverse television industry. Everybody responds in detail about, they all know how the television industry functions. They give you like, the interview data is incredible, really. Everybody's like, it's nepotistic. The way, the cost of things works is we can't take risks with people we don't know. So you have to hire people in your networks already. And there's a social capital question. So, the sort of industry structures make, new forms of hiring really, really difficult. But at the same time, when you're kind of pushed, you know, when you're sort of nudging people with like, so what do we do? They're like, I don't know, maybe outreach in schools to tell people they could have careers, you know, stuff like this. So it is really striking how there isn't a sort of an ignorance about the relationship between who is commissioning, who is hiring, you know, who is on prize judgments, and diversity or the lack of. Everybody knows this, but reflexively people seem powerless. You know, they will tell you these stories right to the point where they say there's nothing we can do about it, or, you know, their solutions are trite and ineffective. There's also like lots of other things I can say, but I don't know, Kathryn, do you want to come back?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I agree. And I think it's sort of that last point you just made, that people either say, oh, well, it's always been like this, or, oh, well, there's nothing we can do about it. So, I mean, we are talking about actually being creative about strategies for pretty fundamental rethinking of our cultural industries and our art worlds. And that might mean, you know, that's at policy level, it's at all kinds of levels, but it's also at that the point of actually saying, for example, to the market, well, no, you shouldn't have that stranglehold on opportunity. Or, you know, what if we did require auction houses to put a percentage of their sales into a fund for artists? You know, how can we actually generate some economic opportunities for individuals in you know, these precarious and you know, incredibly important industries? So in fact, I don't think we're being bold enough. And putting pressure on market players and you know, and others. But yeah,
I was going to say, I wonder if those people who are saying that, you know, things can't really change are the gatekeepers. But
I mean, it's really striking actually in some of the field work we've done. A bunch of us published this paper looking at basically older white men who are gatekeepers and how, you know, brilliant, and this is in European Journal of Cultural Studies, how reflexive they are, you know, how they get all the problems. And then you're like, have you changed your hiring practices? And they're like, no, of course not. Like, you know, don't be insane. And it's like, but you were the one doing the hiring. Like, it's your decision. Why are you not taking these decisions differently? And it's like, well, you know, that'd be a bit risky. So yeah.
Trevor, just because we had a couple of your questions already answered, I might move on, but then I can come back. Trevor was asking about how these different, how different industries differ, and I think you've commented a little bit about that. Carol's question is about the role of intergenerational wealth and how, or inherited wealth, and how inherited wealth might or might not change the dynamics. I think that both of your chapters talk to. Is this something that you've looked at within this area of research? So, you know, this idea that, you know, you eventually have a safety net. You might not have it there, but right now, but you know, like maybe one of your case studies had that coming down the line. So it was a little bit willing to take that risk, more willing to take that risk because they knew that eventually they'd be okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I can give you a nice anecdote on this. Many years ago, I did a project about actors and the kind of acting industry, interviewing actors across Britain, but quite a lot of them are in London. And I interviewed one actor, and the conversation was basically like, are you working? What have you been doing? And they were like, not really. I'm, you know, reading for kind of friends and stuff. And, you know, there was this sort of pregnant pause around, so what are you doing for money? And it was clear that their parents had bought them a house in, you know, nearish central London, and they were effectively a landlord. And that, I think, was the most stark example of inherited wealth in ways that are, you know, sensible and legitimate investments for the family, that, you know, for various kind of tax reasons are good to kind of do before inheritance tax looms, although it's at a very sort of like high level of wealth where that hits in the UK. And yeah, you know, we've got lots of stuff in fieldwork about spousal income being really crucial. You know, in a Victorian sense, marrying well as the kind of basis for your artistic and cultural career. The tricky thing, though, is quantifying this stuff. And I don't know, Kathryn, if you've got better approaches on this, but wealth is extremely hard to track down in the UK. The UK is, moderately kind of secretive. I can recommend Aaron Reeves and Sam Friedman's new book, Born to Rule, where they look at probate records to kind of track elite wealth. But compared to stuff like research that goes on in Scandinavian countries, where there's been, real kind of advances in looking at the relationship between, because they're Scandinavians, they're very Budgesian, so, economic, social and cultural capital, we're really behind on that.
Yeah, and just adding to that, you're absolutely right. It is very hard to dig into the detail there and to get sort of robust evidence. I mean, anecdotally, of course, the history of art is full of artists who have come from wealthy families or who've got that safety net, and that continues well into the present. I guess one of the counters to it, or at least what can artists do? And again, I'm talking about the visual arts here. To sort of counter that. And I think there's actually real merit in artists sticking together, which sounds odd because it's a terribly individualistic profession. But you look at a group like the YBAs, the Young British Artists from the 1990s, led by Damien Hirst, Tracy M and Yinka Shonibare, artists who have gone on to have really successful careers. The first thing that they did as a group, and that, sort of Damien Hirst at the helm, exhibiting together, actually getting out there, aggressively marketing themselves, branding themselves, and sticking together. So actually, getting gallerist representation, getting a sort of collector base very early in their careers. And so it's that crucial time, coming out of art school, that I think is absolutely, vital for artists. And so it's a kind of do-it-yourself safety net. It's not much of a safety net, but we saw a little bit of it also in the pandemic with artists getting together to run their own auctions, for example. Again, as groups, as collectives, but nothing replaces that safety net so that you can fall back on if you've obviously got private means.
This is I think it brings up this idea, though, that it would be maybe the next phase of this work is looking at the lifetime downward and social mobility of these actors, right? Because, one thing that you mentioned, Dave, in your case studies is John was 20 and this other Laura was, I think, in her 40s or something. And at this point, John appears downwardly mobile and Laura appears upwardly mobile, but we're not quite sure what's going to happen at the end of their lifetimes. So this is the thing that always I think that's what, in a way, Carol's point brought up for me, is that this mobility needs to be looked at over the course of a lifetime as opposed to a one point in time, but it's obviously very difficult to be able to get those data. Michael's had his hand up forever, so I'm going to move to him.
Okay, thank you, Kathryn and Dave, for really interesting presentations. I guess I'm gonna pose my question to Dave, and you'll excuse me if this is sort of a naive question, but I do want to understand it better, because part of your talk is that downward mobility matters. This is actually an important thing to study. Now, if I put cultural industries aside and just look at the entire economy and society from 30,000 feet, I look down. There has to be kind of an equilibrium between upward and downward mobility. They have to match in some kind of way. Any barrister's child who goes downwardly mobile into something essentially is freeing up space for somebody else to move up into a barrister's position as a young person. So it kind of balances out. And so I guess my first part of my question is that if we like upward mobility, if we think, well, that's a really good thing to have, we want to see that, it's necessarily balanced by an equivalent amount of downward mobility. It has to. It's great that a bus driver's child can move up, but we still need people to drive the buses. We actually have a shortage here in our town. And that leads, I guess, to my second question, is that for all that people deride the idea of meritocracy, is not the whole idea of all of this mobility ultimately, in an ideal world, to get to some kind of meritocracy, where the people who are in various kinds of professions are in fact truly the most deserving in some way or another to be there? Or have I got that wrong? So I guess, so I'm asking two kinds of questions here, but they both relate to this. Why do we care about downward mobility?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Like, I think the one view of mobility in the kind of sociological literature, if you're thinking around sort of relative chances, is this, there must be equal amounts of upward and downward, because, you have a kind of fixed overall picture of society. One thing that I think is worth thinking about over time is how particular occupations expand and others contract. So, there isn't a coal mining industry, broadly speaking, in the UK now. There is a much, kind of vastly expanded creative industry, depending on how we want to define that. And these, I suppose, more kind of absolute levels of mobility are where the kind of the interesting thing happens for the work we're talking about. Because broadly speaking, in the UK, there was a moment where you had a big expansion of professional occupations from the 1950s to about the end of the 1970s or so. And that gave rise to quite a lot of, I mean, I'd hesitate to call it meritocracy, because that, I think, is a loaded term with lots of baggage, but far more opportunities for upward movement, with, in absolute terms, not that much evidence of kind of the same levels of really serious downward movement. The chances of someone moving up from starting off in the house of a coal miner to being a barrister, were not matched by the chances of barristers' kids ending up as coal miners. That kind of golden age of expansion is really important there. And I think that's where I'm more sort of interested than the kind of classic mobility tables where, you've got a sort of, fixed level of people going up and people going down. I think on the latter point, we need a better frame. So, we might think of something that's to do with talent and opportunity. And it's clear that in some societies, people who, are maybe talented songwriters or talented artists have far greater opportunities than in other societies. And we might think of, perhaps we'd like our societies to be more like those. As I say, I really hesitate with meritocracy, partially because it's a bit of a kind of a shell of a term now. Partially, the original Michael Young use of it was meant to be satirical and to suggest that actually maybe it's not entirely a good thing if you have a kind of group of meritocrats running society, punishing people for their lack of talent and their laziness, perhaps, which has parallels with where we are in contemporary society. But yeah, I think much more in terms of, I guess, kind of an opportunity society.
Kathryn, do you want to remark at all about?
Well, no, just briefly. I mean, I agree, and I think that's sort of the gist of our paper as well. I mean, we talked about roles and we talked about fair equality of opportunity, and simply the idea that socially desirable positions, for example, being an artist, should be something that's equally accessible to those with the same talent and ambition. So it is simply creating a structure of society where that opportunity pluralism exists. Dave, are you about to respond to that?
Yeah, so with my sort of positive public policy, social justice hat on, that is entirely my position. There is somewhat of my inner sociologist that thinks that sometimes when we have these discussions, we're asking the wrong questions, that these professions are, so bound up with elite reproduction that, particularly if you think of contemporary media industries, I've got a sort of like a man with a sort of, sore tooth that I occasionally dip into the New York Times political coverage, and I'm blown away by how they're covering your presidential election. It is remarkable, the kind of frames that are used with one side and the other. And it does strike me that, you know, to an extent, you can take a much, I suppose, more worrying view on these things, that the reason, you know, that they are restricted by particular elite groups, the reason that there is such a close relationship with, say, intergenerational wealth and being a journalist, working in the film industry, working in the television industry, is, you know, there's a reason we get these ideological messages. And, you know, yeah, that raises a broader question about, and this kind of goes back actually, Kathryn, to the end of your talk, you know, do we want to be thinking we need to do much more kind of serious structural change to our artistic and cultural industries, so we're not just replicating, I guess, a kind of a chance for assimilation for those from outside of the dominant backgrounds, and the chance, and, you know, Joe, you kind of picked up on this, for those outsiders, or, you know, those people who don't fit the norms, to then exclude those who come after them.
Right. Well, I have to end the talk, and I don't want to. We're, you know, 2 past the hour, and we've only lost one person. So I think this has been a really fascinating discussion. And thank you both to Kathryn Brown and Dave O'Brien. Really great. And please do join us. And I was just going to say, we are very good at starting messy conversations at the Center for Cultural Affairs. So I think this is a very good example of that one. And again, the book, I think, stimulates all of these types of conversations. So please do join us in a couple of weeks. We have Christos Makridis, and he is going to be speaking about the returns, the geography and returns to private arts organizations. And then we'll come back in a couple weeks after that to talk about, to hear from a couple of our other volume authors about this book. So thank you again, Kathryn and Dave. That was simply wonderful.
Thank you both.
Bye, all.